A pirate who couldn't read owned more wealth than entire countries. While Elon Musk built rockets, this man controlled something far more valuable. But here's what nobody tells you about how he actually made his fortune. Most people think the biggest fortune ever made came from tech stocks or oil wells. Well, they're dead wrong. The richest haul in history? It came from a guy with a wooden leg, a rusty cutlass, and absolutely zero respect for maritime law. Henry Avery wasn't born a pirate. The man started out as legitimate as your neighborhood accountant. He worked the docks, sailed merchant ships, and probably complained about his boss, just like everyone else. But here's where it gets interesting. Avery was making pennies while watching rich merchants count their gold. Sound familiar? It's like working at McDonald's while your manager drives a Tesla. The breaking point came aboard the Charles II. Picture this. Months at sea, terrible food, worse pay, and a captain who treated his crew like furniture. Avery had enough. He organized a mutiny that would make any corporate takeover look like a friendly handshake. One night, the crew simply decided they weren't employees anymore. They were entrepreneurs. Dangerous, heavily armed entrepreneurs. But here's what made Avery different from your typical pirate. While most pirates were basically floating thugs who'd rob a fishing boat for spare change, Avery thought bigger, much bigger. He had this crazy idea that if you're going to break the law, you might as well break it spectacularly, like going from shoplifting candy bars to robbing Fort Knox. The late 1600s were perfect for this kind of career change. Trade routes were packed with treasure ships, naval protection was spotty, and honestly, the legal system moved slower than dial-up internet. If you were smart, ruthless, and incredibly lucky, you could make more money in one afternoon than most people saw in 10 lifetimes. Avery's crew loved him because he wasn't just another captain barking orders. The guy actually listened to his men, shared the wealth fairly, and somehow convinced a bunch of misfits to work together like a well-oiled machine. Think of it as team building, but with cannons and considerably higher stakes. Then there's the leadership style. Elon Musk builds companies through innovation and market disruption. Avery? He built his empire through pure audacity and the occasional threat of walking the plank. Different methods, same result, absolute loyalty from people willing to follow you anywhere. But what Avery did next changed everything. One single raid that would make him richer than some small countries. The Ganji Sawai wasn't just any ship. This floating fortress belonged to the Mughal Empire and was packed with enough treasure to make a modern billionaire weep with envy. We're talking about a vessel so loaded with gold, silver, and jewels that it practically groaned under the weight. Avery spotted this prize in September 1695 near the mouth of the Red Sea. The timing? Perfect. The ship was returning from a pilgrimage to Mecca, which meant it was carrying not just the emperor's treasure, but also the life savings of countless wealthy passengers. Think of it as hijacking Fort Knox while it's being moved by armored car. But here's where it gets interesting. The Ganji Sawai wasn't defenseless. This beast carried over 400 armed men and 60 cannons. Most pirates would have taken one look and sailed in the opposite direction. Avery? He saw dollar signs. The battle lasted hours. Cannons roared, muskets cracked, and smoke filled the air like a deadly fog. Then something incredible happened. One of the Mughal ship's cannons exploded, killing several gunners and throwing the crew into chaos. Talk about luck. Avery's men swarmed aboard and found what might be history's greatest jackpot, 600,000 pounds in treasure. That's roughly $400 million in today's money. Per person. Makes sense, right? We're talking about wealth that would make Elon Musk's early PayPal days look like pocket change. The loot included everything from raw gold bars to emeralds the size of chicken eggs. One passenger allegedly carried diamonds worth more than entire European kingdoms. The pirates didn't just steal money, they grabbed silk, spices, and precious artifacts that would have made museum curators faint. Well, here's the kicker. While Musk built his fortune through years of calculated risks and innovations, Avery essentially won the lottery with cannons. The difference? Musk's wealth grows through stock prices and company valuations. Avery's treasure was cold, hard, immediately spendable cash and jewels. The crew divided the spoils using the traditional pirate method. Captain gets the biggest share, officers get decent cuts, and regular sailors split the rest. Even the lowest-ranking pirate walked away with enough money to buy a mansion and live like royalty for decades. But massive wealth brings massive problems. The Mughal emperor was furious. The British government panicked about trade relationships. Suddenly, every navy in the world wanted Henry Avery's head on a platter. Avery's biggest problem wasn't finding treasure. It was staying alive long enough to spend it. The moment word spread about his massive haul from the Ganji Sawai, every government, navy, and bounty hunter in the world wanted his head on a platter. Well, and his treasure in their vaults. Think about it this way. If you robbed the largest bank in the world today, you'd have every FBI agent, Interpol officer, and probably half of Twitter trying to track you down. That's essentially what Avery faced, except instead of modern surveillance, he had the entire British Navy, the East India Company's fleet, and the furious Mughal Empire hunting him across the seven seas. But here's where Avery proved he wasn't just lucky, he was brilliant. While other pirates celebrated their victories by getting drunk in the nearest port, usually ending up in chains, Avery vanished like a magician's assistant. One day, he's the most wanted man on Earth. The next day, poof, gone. His strategy was simple, but genius. Instead of flaunting his wealth like some pirates did, basically the 17th century equivalent of posting your lottery winnings on Instagram, Avery quietly moved his treasure through a network of corrupt officials and shady merchants. He basically invented money laundering 3 centuries before it had a name. The man had safe houses scattered across the Caribbean like Elon Musk has Tesla charging stations. Nassau, Madagascar, even rumored hideouts in the American colonies. Each location carefully chosen, each ally bought with just enough gold to ensure loyalty, but not enough to make them targets themselves. And here's the kicker. Unlike today's corporate scandals where everything eventually comes to light through leaked emails or whistleblowers, Avery managed his disappearing act in an era when communication moved at the speed of sailing ships. By the time authorities figured out where he'd been, he was already 3 oceans away. The psychological pressure alone would have crushed most people, constantly looking over your shoulder, never knowing if the next ship on the horizon carried friends or executioners. Yet Avery thrived under this pressure for years. His greatest achievement wasn't just stealing the treasure, it was becoming one of the only pirates in history to successfully retire without facing the gallows or Davy Jones's locker. Makes you wonder what kind of exit strategy he actually had planned, doesn't it? What do you do when you've just stolen more money than most countries see in a decade? Well, if you're Henry Avery, you certainly don't put it in a savings account and call your financial advisor. Unlike Elon Musk, who reinvests his billions into rockets and electric cars like he's playing the world's most expensive video game, Avery had a different strategy. Hide it. Fast. The man had essentially won the colonial lottery, but his prize came with a massive target painted on his back. Every navy, bounty hunter, and opportunistic sailor wanted a piece of his treasure. It's like becoming famous overnight, except instead of paparazzi, you get cannons. Avery's post-piracy plans were ambitious, if not slightly delusional. Rumor has it he wanted to establish his own pirate colony. Think of it as an early version of a tech startup, except instead of venture capitalists, he had cutthroats, and instead of stock options, everyone got actual gold. But here's where things get interesting. The colony idea flopped harder than a dad joke at a teenager's birthday party. Turns out, managing a bunch of pirates is like herding cats. Drunk, armed, historically violent cats. So Avery did what any sensible person would do with 600,000 pounds in stolen treasure. He vanished. Completely. His wealth wasn't tied up in company stocks that could crash overnight. No board meetings, no quarterly earnings calls. Just cold, hard precious metals and jewels that he could literally stuff into bags and disappear with. Makes you wonder if he was onto something, doesn't it? The fascinating part is how Avery managed his investments. While modern billionaires diversify portfolios and buy properties, Avery invested in people and places that could keep him anonymous. He essentially bought himself a new identity, which in the 1600s was probably cheaper than a Tesla today. His treasure became the stuff of legends. Centuries later, people are still hunting for it. That's quite a legacy for someone who technically had the world's worst job performance review. But here's what really gets you thinking about Avery's approach to wealth management. He knew something that modern rich folks sometimes forget: Having money and keeping it are two completely different skills. And the mystery of what happened to all that treasure? Well, that's where Avery's story takes an even stranger turn. Henry Avery didn't just disappear into history. He rocketed into legend faster than you could say pieces of eight. Think about it this way. While other pirates were getting hanged or dying broke, Avery became the original celebrity outlaw. Songs about him spread through taverns like wildfire. Ballads turned him into a folk hero who stuck it to the man and got away with it. Sound familiar? It's like how we worship tech billionaires today, except Avery's fans were drunk sailors instead of Twitter followers. The guy became a walking myth. Stories claimed he'd married a Mughal princess and ruled his own island kingdom. Others said he commanded fleets of ghost ships. Complete nonsense, of course, but people ate it up. Makes sense, right? Everyone loves a good rags to riches story, especially when it involves outsmarting an empire. But here's where it gets interesting. Avery's legend practically invented the modern treasure hunt. Every buried chest story, every X marks the spot tale, they all trace back to him. He created an entire industry of dreamers with shovels digging up beaches for centuries. It's like he accidentally launched the world's longest-running pyramid scheme. The cultural impact was massive. Pirates went from being seen as common criminals to romantic rebels. Avery's story proved that with enough audacity, a nobody could become richer than kings. Well, at least temporarily. What's really wild is how his tale mirrors our modern obsession with disruptors. Just like Elon Musk tweeting his way through controversies while revolutionizing industries, Avery thumbed his nose at authority while rewriting the rules of wealth accumulation. Both men understood something crucial. Sometimes the biggest rewards come from the biggest risks. The difference? Musk's disruptions are legal and documented. Avery's were decidedly not, which only added to his mystique. Literature couldn't get enough of him either. Writers turned his story into the blueprint for every swashbuckling adventure that followed. He became the template for the charming rogue who wins through wit rather than birthright. Then there's the psychological appeal. Avery represented pure freedom. No boss, no rules, no taxes, just you, your crew, and whatever you could take. It's the ultimate entrepreneurial fantasy, minus the business plan and regulatory compliance. His legend asks a fascinating question. If you could accumulate unimaginable wealth by breaking every rule, would you? But legends have a funny way of colliding with reality, and when we crunch the actual numbers behind Avery's fortune, things get even more interesting. When economists talk about historical wealth, they love throwing around big numbers that sound impressive until you actually crunch the math. But here's where Henry Avery gets really interesting. That 600,000 pounds he supposedly grabbed from the Ganji Sawai? In today's money, we're talking about roughly $400 million. And that's being conservative with the calculations, but wait, it gets better. Most financial experts use basic inflation calculators that don't account for investment potential. If Avery had somehow managed to invest his treasure in something as simple as land or basic trade ventures, and we're talking the most boring, safe investments of his era, the compound growth over 3 centuries would be absolutely staggering. We're looking at numbers that would make Elon Musk's net worth look like pocket change. Well, maybe not pocket change, but you get the idea. The fascinating part? Avery pulled this off in what, maybe 6 months of active piracy? Musk built his fortune over decades through multiple companies, stock options, and reinvestment strategies. Meanwhile, our pirate friend basically won the lottery with cannons. Then there's the purchasing power angle that really puts things in perspective. 600,000 pounds in 1695 could buy you entire counties, not just houses. You could probably purchase a small kingdom if you knew the right people and had enough rum to loosen their tongues. Compare that to today's billionaires who need lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors just to figure out where their money is. Avery's wealth was refreshingly simple. Gold, silver, and jewels you could actually hold in your hands. Of course, there's one tiny detail modern entrepreneurs don't have to worry about. Musk doesn't need to hide his wealth from 3 different navies and an extremely angry Mughal emperor. His biggest concern is probably Twitter complaints and SEC filings. But here's the kicker, and this is where the math gets really wild. If Avery had managed to establish that rumored pirate colony and turned it into a legitimate trading empire, we might be talking about generational wealth that could have rivaled entire nations' treasuries. The man essentially created the ultimate get-rich-quick scheme, except with significantly more risk of being hanged. Makes you wonder what kind of economic impact one incredibly successful pirate actually had on the world's financial systems, doesn't it? Avery's incredible heist didn't just make him rich, it accidentally created the world's first get-rich-quick scheme that actually worked. Well, for him anyway. The news of his 600,000-pound jackpot spread faster than gossip at a church social. Suddenly, every sailor from London to Charleston was eyeing their captain's rum supply and muttering about early retirement plans. It's like when your neighbor wins the lottery and half the block starts buying scratch-offs, except these scratch-offs involved cannons. But here's where things get interesting. Avery essentially became the Elon Musk of maritime crime. His success story inspired countless copycats who figured, hey, if that guy can rob a floating treasure chest, why can't I? The problem? Most of them had about as much business sense as a fish trying to climb a tree. Pirates started forming crews left and right, convinced they'd found the ultimate business model. No overhead costs, no taxes, just pure profit sharing on the high seas. Makes sense, right? Well, except for the tiny detail that most merchant ships weren't carrying the equivalent of a small country's GDP in their cargo holds. The economic ripple effects were wild. Insurance rates for merchant vessels shot through the roof faster than SpaceX launches. Trade routes that had been stable for decades suddenly became as risky as investing in cryptocurrency. Ship owners started hiring more guards than a Vegas casino. Then there's the inflation factor nobody talks about. Avery's crew dumped massive amounts of gold and silver into various port economies. Imagine walking into your local coffee shop with a briefcase full of $100 bills. Suddenly, everyone's raising their prices because they know you can afford it. The really crazy part, most of the pirates who followed Avery's example ended up broke, dead, or both. It's the classic lottery winner syndrome, except instead of buying too many cars, they were buying too much rum and not enough common sense. They saw the treasure, but missed the strategy. Avery had essentially created the first viral success story. His legend spread through taverns and docks like a medieval internet meme, inspiring thousands, but enriching very few. The man had inadvertently proven that sometimes the biggest impact of extreme wealth isn't what you do with it. It's what everyone else does trying to get it. But what happened to Avery himself after creating this economic chaos? That's where his story takes a turn nobody saw coming. So what really happened to Henry Avery after he pulled off history's greatest heist? Well, this is where the story gets darker than my coffee on a Monday morning. Here's the thing nobody talks about. While we love imagining Avery sipping margaritas on some tropical beach, counting his millions, reality probably had other plans. The man who supposedly made more money than Elon Musk might have ended up broker than a college student buying textbooks. Most historians believe Avery returned to England sometime around 1705. But here's where it gets interesting. He likely tried to convert his stolen treasure into usable money through shady dealers and corrupt merchants. These weren't exactly the kind of people you'd trust with your lunch money, let alone a fortune worth billions today. The problem with being the world's most wanted pirate? Everyone knows you're loaded, but nobody wants to give you a fair exchange rate. Think of it like trying to sell a obviously stolen Rolex to a pawn shop. You're getting pennies on the dollar, assuming they don't just rob you outright. One account suggests Avery was systematically cheated by Bristol merchants who knew he couldn't exactly file a complaint with the Better Business Bureau. They'd give him worthless goods or promise payment that never came. What's a wanted pirate going to do? Sue them? But wait, there's more mystery brewing. Some evidence points to Avery living under an assumed name in Devon, working as a common laborer. The man who once commanded the seas allegedly died penniless around 1714. That's like Jeff Bezos ending up as a Walmart greeter. Then again, maybe that's exactly what a smart pirate would want people to believe. After all, if everyone thinks you're dead and broke, they stop looking for you and your treasure. The weirdest part? No substantial treasure has ever been found. Not one doubloon. Either Avery was the greatest financial planner in pirate history, or those Bristol merchants pulled off an even bigger heist than he did. Unlike Musk, whose wealth is tracked to the penny by Forbes, Avery took his secrets to the grave. Whether he died rich or poor, we'll never know. But one thing's certain, his disappearing act was more impressive than any of Houdini's tricks. The lesson here might be simpler than we think. Sometimes the greatest treasure isn't gold or silver.